Hey everyone, welcome to the Smokin Barrels Show. On this episode, we're going to demystify trigger types. So in this episode, our cigar counterparts are out shopping for their first firearms, and they've encountered a lot of different terminology and different types out there. So Ray and I'd like to demonstrate different trigger action types just to kind of demystify and also showcase the types of triggers that are out there and how the firearms function.
Yeah, so we have a good selection over here on the table. So whenever you walk into a firearms store, usually the person behind the counter is going to say, "What are you looking for?" They might say, "Are you looking for like single action, double action, single action, DASA, also referred as, or striker?" So we're going to go through all the different platforms that are out on the market.
I can see how for the new firearm owner it's a little bit over.
Yeah, it's like, what are you talking about, man? Like, what did you just say to me? Like, it sounds like you're cursing at me. So let's you want to? All right, let's.
What do we start with first?
All right, so we're going to go take a step back in time with a single action revolver. So normally whenever you see movies, you just see the guy like, and just for safety check for our audience and viewers, all safe.
Nothing in the chamber.
Nothing in the chamber. And you verifying?
Verified.
All right. So whenever you watch those old westerns, kind of, you'll see the guys just like, slinging their guns, but it actually doesn't happen. So this is referred to as a single action trigger, meaning that you just pulling on the trigger won't actually actuate the hammer. It won't move the hammer. So for these types of firearms, you actually have to manually pull the hammer back. And you saw that trigger move. Let me do it again, just in case. So when you pull that hammer back, you'll see that the trigger will engage.
So the single action is referring to the dropping of the hammer. So the trigger only has to do one thing, and that's release and drop the hammer so it hits the
Exactly. So the hammer is back, and just like you mentioned, if I now pull the trigger, for the viewers out there, boop, there goes the hammer.
Hammer falls, hits the firing hits the firing pin.
Firing pin, yep. And that'll hit the primer on the bullet and causing that round to go off. So this is kind of the basic single action. You can think of it that way. And then
history and origins of the first trigger action type.
Yeah, and then cool thing that the way that we're going to go through this is we're going to take a step in time on how the firearms kind of evolved. So after this single action, we have these now. The 1911, created by John Moses Browning. That dude's a genius.
So we're going from a revolver type to a semi-auto action type. Can I take a sidestep?
Yeah.
And semi-auto, when you hear it when they're out shopping, is actually referring to not the trigger action type, but the loading mechanism. So it's actually semi-automatically loading a round from the magazine and loading it into the chamber. So that has nothing to do with the trigger action type. So semi-auto is referring to the loading mechanism.
Yes, exactly. And just safety check also for our viewers. Clear? All right. Yeah, and just like Ho was talking about, so every time when this magazine's in here, every time round goes off, it'll clear the round that's in the chamber and load a new one. So going through time, this is what kind of came next, 1911. So this also is considered a single action pistol, meaning that me just pulling the trigger won't do anything. So in order to actuate the hammer, you have to cock it back yourself manually. And then one consideration about 1911s is there's a grip safety. So even though the hammer is cocked back, you pulling that trigger won't actually do anything. You have to press the grip safety and then pull the trigger.
That was a very short trigger.
This trigger is amazing. Yeah, it's like a 4-pound trigger. It's
very
awesome.
Short and crisp.
Yeah. And just side note, so 1911s will also have this manual safety as well. So
lots of redundant safeties built
yeah. So it has a bunch of safety. Super safe. I mean, this design's over 100 years old, and it's still like,
modern.
Yeah. And this trigger is considered the gold standard nowadays. So this is the 1911, still considered a single action.
So we have a single action revolver and a single action semi-automatic handgun.
Yes. And then as we go deeper, that's won't stay there. That's not propping up. So as we go deeper and deeper into time, we now have something called the double action. And this
double action as in two actions.
Yes. And so this is Cold Python. So double action meaning, like you mentioned, single action, you had to manually cock it back, right? But double action, you pulling that trigger will actually actuate that hammer.
So it's not only manipulating the hammer, it's pulling the hammer down, but
Yes.
it's also releasing the hammer. So
Yes.
So as opposed to single action, where it only had to release the hammer and you have to manually cock it yourself or drop the hammer, the double action, the trigger will also
Actuate the hammer.
Actuate the hammer.
Yep. That's exactly it. And then cool thing that about the double action designs nowadays in most firearms is that they're referred to as DASA, which stands for double action, single action, right? So meaning that we have double action. You don't have to manually cock the hammer back, but you have the option to single action as well. So you saw that me cocking this hammer back actually set that trigger.
So now you have a lighter, shorter trigger.
Yes, exactly. And it's like the best of both worlds. So double action, which is great because immediately, if you're in a pressing situation, you can whip it out and you can, go. But, if you have some time or you have the opportunity for a lighter trigger, you can set it back in single action and you can just boop. So, this is your P226. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Let's talk about it. So we went from a revolver type to a double action semi-automatic pistol. So it's very similar to Ray's. If you notice the hammer here, if I pull in the trigger, also safe. If I'm pulling the trigger, if you notice, the hammer will drop down, and then it'll also release the trigger upon one full trigger pull. Similar to the Python here, this particular model is a double action, single action. So if you were to cock the firearm, notice the hammer will go down and the trigger will also go to the single action mode. So this will also have a very short and crisp trigger.
Brilliant. So you get the best of both worlds also, but with a high capacity magazine.
Yes.
Amazing. So on this, the 1911, we have that safety, right? So on your P226, is that a safety or what is that?
Good point. So there is no inherent trigger safety on this particular firearm, but what SIG has designed is if it is in the single action mode, it has a decocker so that if you were to use this mechanism, it will release the hammer in a safe manner and without hitting the firing pin, and it'll go into a safer mode. It actually will go back into double action mode, which is a very long and deliberate trigger.
Yeah. Okay, so I think that's a brilliant compromise, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing.
With SIG, depending on your preference, this is a double action, single action. They also have variants that it's double action only, so it won't have the single action mode. You only have the long double action firing mode.
Yeah.
And then it also comes in a single action variant where it actually has an external safety.
Oh.
So it's depending on your preference, you can pick this up in basically 3 different flavors.
Oh, brilliant. And then, I think that's a great compromise. So for this particular model, for this DASA model, semi-automatic, so after you fire that first round, your trigger will be primed. So it's like a single action, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. It really depends on how you're using it. If you were to load a fresh magazine and then to cock it, it's already in single action mode. But if you were carrying it, for example, you don't ever, because this doesn't have an external safety, you don't ever want to carry this with a chamber in single action mode. So you actually want, if you were to carry it in a holster, you would actually want to decock it. There's a chamber there's a round in the chamber, and the hammer is in the hammer down.
Okay. That's a brilliant safety consideration. Yeah. Okay, cool.
So Ray, let's go to more modern striker fire.
Okay, yeah. So, this is the new hotness nowadays, right? Striker fire. I mean, the Navy SEALs adopted this firearm. This is the Glock 19 Gen 5, which is also the Glock 19 itself is the most highest selling pistol in our country right now in the United States. So, Ho, did you want to tell me a little bit about this? Hold on, let me make sure that we're safe and good.
Safe.
Okay.
So, you're right, Ray. The Navy used to use the 226, and they have now switched to the Glock 19. And when we say modern, it's relatively modern. The Glock was introduced back in the 80s, but it's modern compared to some of these other action types.
Yeah.
So, different from the single action and the double action, the striker fired doesn't have an external hammer. There's
Show our viewers.
There's an internal channel in here with a spring and a striker assembly. So when you go and pull the trigger, it essentially compresses that spring and releases the striker, which releases a firing pin to the primer.
Oh, nice, awesome. So yeah, I mean, you mentioned that there's no hammer. I mean, this looks really different compared to all the other firearms on the table. All right, looking at this, so this thing got a decocker, right? This thing got a manual safety. This doesn't have anything on the side. What's it got?
So when you're talking about single actions and double actions, you're generally referring to a firearm that has an external hammer. This doesn't have an external hammer. It doesn't have a hammer at all.
Is it safe?
So the striker fired has an internal channel, and there's a spring and a striker mechanism built in within here. So when you pull the trigger, it's essentially compressing that spring and releasing that striker to hit the firing pin.
Oh, gotcha. Okay, so why does this trigger look so weird?
So this trigger is a little goofier. It doesn't have an external safety. It doesn't have a long double action trigger. But for the Glock and specifically, it's got a trigger safety. So you have this little small trigger, small safety built into the trigger.
Okay.
The trigger will not pull unless you deliberately.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so if it get hung up on something, it won't work. So you have to depress this.
Yeah. You have to deliberately put your finger on the trigger and pull for it to release the striker mechanism.
Gotcha. Okay. Cool. So should we go to now the SIG? I mean,
it's another modern variant, very popular.
Yeah, I mean, the U.S. Army and the Marine Corps just adopted a variant of this, right? The P320. I mean, so I guess from this, we now kind of are evolving to different kind of flavors of striker fire now.
Just wanted to add, with the popularity of striker fired since the 80s and modern manufacturing, striker fired firearms are generally cheaper to manufacture. You have these polymer frames, there's inherently less parts involved, and it's now the modern standard.
Yeah, actually, you know what? That's a great point. I mean, the striker firearms are a lot cheaper. Like this, I picked it up for I think around like $700, something like that.
So as our cigar counterparts are out shopping, one of the questions we've heard is, what's the best kind?
So I think that's a trick question, right? Me personally, I don't think that there is a best kind. I have my own personal preference, but it all depends on the use case, right? So me personally, my favorite is 1911 platform. This semi-automatic single action trigger. That trigger, you can't compare it, but if I was in a zombie apocalypse, what would I take? I'll still take that. But I'm also going to take this Glock with me, but I know that's really, really dependable. I mean, they are really low maintenance, whereas that is kind of high maintenance. And also, I'm going to take my Colt Python because it's a 357 Magnum. So this uses a huge caliber, and then the recoil management is manageable. Recoil's manageable. How about you? What about you, Ho?
So I don't really have a preference either. I'm okay with the striker fired, double action, single action. I would say that I don't like the double action only triggers. That long and heavy deliberate trigger pull. Some people like, actually, police departments. That was their that was part of their training safety. That long double action trigger is just something I don't prefer. For me, I've done a lot of. I've been starting to do some competitions with my SIG, double action, single action. So I've actually gotten very accustomed to that, and I like the heft and the weight of the firearm, the weight of the steel frame.
Right.
So
I mean,
I don't really have a particular.
And it's all about use case. I mean, I know that some people that love to carry revolvers, they prefer double action only because it won't have a hammer because it's usually hidden within the frame. So they don't have to worry about getting snagged on something like that. It's all based on use case. Oh, what are we smoking, man? You want to tell the audience what we're smoking?
Oh yeah, we're actually both smoking tobacco specials today.
Yeah, it's like 7 in the morning. This thing got hint of coffee, wakes you right up. This is great. This is a great morning cigar.
I do like that coffee. I'm relatively a newer smoker, but I do like the coffee, and there's a little bit of a sweetness to it.
Right, right.
So we hope that was helpful, us demonstrating the different trigger types and firearm types. Please comment, like, and subscribe, and join us next time.
And we'll see you next time on the Smokin Barrels Show.